Lisa. I also bring greetings from Dr. Rudy Crew, who is so pleased to know that this conversation is taking place today. The word silo in my life used to mean something you found on a farm. And I would have to say that this summer, when Rudy Crew approached me and asked me if I would join his team to really help us unpack what we could accomplish together, working across our different agencies and levels of education, I first said no. Not because I didn't think it was a good idea, but I actually loved my job. Some of you know that I've been at Western Oregon University as Dean of the College of Education for 10 years, and I just loved my job. And so I did say no, and then, he kept after me and kept tempting me with visions of what we could do if we really all worked together. How many of you are watching the work around collective impact? There's a whole movement afoot around what happens in communities. Ironically, it didn't start with education per se, but it started in other venues where people sat down and said, wow, if we bring our judicial system and our health systems and our governments together, what could we accomplish for young people, and just in a different way of problem solving. So for me, I'm very excited that the work that's underway with a P20 system is really pointing us towards what we can accomplish if we look across our silos. So today, I want to first of all commend you on the work that you're going to do. It's a Friday. The sun is not shining. That's good. And you're inside. There are no windows really. But you know that the work that you're going to do today is critical, because you will arrive at some unified ideas. You'll be further along with your ability to conceptualize what does it really mean to say somebody is college and career readiness. And it won't be the end of the conversation, because as I look out here, where are the K-12 folks? Do you see any? 1, 2. Okay, where are the representatives from OUS and private four-year institutions? 1, 2. Okay, so you can see that we still have work to do to spread that across those silos. And yet what we know is if we can reach common definitions for all of us to use, we are going to be able to work faster, more effectively, and communicate in ways that we know what we're talking about. And, I just have to give you an example that really stymied me in my own childhood. My parents, we ate dinner together. It was an Italian family. Dinner was important. You had to be there on time. You'd eat everything on your plate and participate in the conversation. And it was good. But, I was so curious about why my parents were so concerned about the euthanasia. We'd have these conversations about euthanasia and why it's good and why it's not good, and I kept going, well, who cares about the teenagers? They're growing up, they're working it out. So you can understand if you're talking about something and I think I know what you mean, but I really don't know what you mean, we can have some real misunderstandings and not even be able to move together. So that's a true story. Don't get me started on what I thought was the survival of the fittest. Okay. So right now in my life, at the same time I said yes to Rudy, I also said yes to another adventure in my life. I do not have children. I have cats. They act like children. But I took on a 18-year-old that had just graduated from high school in the sunny state of Florida, where I have family. And she is my great niece, so you can understand it's my oldest sister's youngest granddaughter. And I had been sort of monitoring her progress in high school. Got a little worried that she wasn't going to make it through high school. She was at one of these wonderful schools that had IB programs and then anybody else that was zoned for the school, right? And you know where the attention went, okay? And so twice I flew to Florida. It was a good excuse. I flew to Florida to meet with the guidance counselor at the high school to just make sure that Miranda was on track. And, first they told me, I'm sorry, we can't fit you in. I said, let me get this right. I'm flying from the West Coast. I'm a dean of education. I used the title this time, I'm here to support the student and her family. We have FERPA signed, everything's done, we're able to talk, and you can't make time. Got a phone call back, yeah, she'll make time for me, okay. Then the second time I went, it was in January. She's supposed to graduate in May, right? And so we sat in it was a different guidance counselor because, you know, that changes too, and then you don't have continuity. And so the guidance counselor, I said to her, I said, we're just here to make sure Miranda's on track to graduate so that she can come to Western Oregon University. And I looked around, there were no pennants from Western Oregon in that office. I sent one. And she looked past me. You know that. You look past the person, you look at Miranda and you go, Miranda, you know what you need to do to graduate, don't you? And I'm going, well, if she knew, we wouldn't all be here. But I let it fly. And Miranda goes, yes, ma'am, which really conveyed total understanding of what she needed to do, don't you think? So we left it at that, and we continued having this conversation. About 10 minutes later, she's on her computer, right? This is January, 2 days before the final term starts. She goes, oh, Miranda, you need another credit of math in order to graduate. My point is this takes a whole community to get each of our kids through. Now, in this particular family, Dad didn't graduate from high school. Mom graduated from high school, but looks like a deer in the headlights every time she has to walk into a school environment. And so this messaging has to be consistent, starting at kindergarten almost, all the way through. And at the community college, it needs to be clear communication around what happens if you choose a career and what next needs to happen there. And then if you're going on to a four-year institution, what needs to happen there. And by the way, do you know that a degree in psychology probably won't get you much of a job except maybe at Applebee's, and you might have to plan to go to graduate school. And there are ways to fund graduate school, and here's the approximate cost. It's this whole sequence that we're talking about, P20. And that is so critical. So Miranda has come to Oregon. She's commented on the weather a lot. I just smile. Lately I've been going, it got up to 60 today. First term, I just did what you should do. Put them in the residence hall. Make sure they get a good start. She was in a student enrichment program. You kind of know about those programs. And she didn't do too well. So, you know, I sent her home for the holidays. I secretly used the code to look at her report card. You're not taping that, are you? Okay. I looked at it and fainted, but I waited for her to call. She kind of delayed because she had to tell me she failed her developmental math course. Okay? So I wrote back. I texted back because, she's 18. I've gotten faster at it. And I said, you got to give me a plan for what you're going to do differently when you come back, because this isn't working for me. It's obviously not working for you. And so she wrote back and said, I think I had too much freedom in the residence hall, so I need to live with you. Okay, all right. So this is all an illustration, and I got you smiling, so now your endorphins are going, because this is what we're all about. Every single student, one at a time, student success, personalized to what their needs are, and making sure that they get the same message everywhere. Consistency. That is going to be critical. And that's what you're here to do today, to begin that process. And there are so many reasons that we are all focused on this college and career readiness. If you Google it now, I think we're up to millions of references around this term, CCR. 5 years ago, I'm not sure we knew what that acronym stood for. But obviously, those of you on the receiving end, this is really important to you, particularly when you look at your shrinking budgets and you look at the amount of energy that we spend on developmental education, and you look at the success rates, and you look at these things called achievement compacts that, want to know how well are students moving through the systems and how long are they taking. And then you have our representatives and senators over in Salem, and by the way, they are busy this year. They're asking, so how much debt is a student acquiring by going through your program? And what's the loan default rate? And what's the employment connection? There's at least 3 bills out there right now trying to establish those systems and the cost of programs and services for every student so that there's transparency. So this is a whole nother shift that we're not used to in higher education. I kind of, because I've worked in K-12, I've taught 4-year-olds, I taught middle school kids, I taught undergraduates, and I taught graduate students. I think that's why Rudy thought maybe I could do this. It's that cross the silos career. But one of the things that's interesting is all the accountability shifts that K-12 has been suffering with for the last 10 years. Guess where it's coming? To a theater near you. And it's going to be with us for the next 10 years. And it's all about new ways of delivering instruction, access, MOOCs, the acceptability and reciprocity for coursework, credit for prior learning. These are all of the pieces that we will not be able to survive without paying attention to them and figuring out how to make them work in our world and be part of the movement. So as I think about this, I also am reminded that the other people who need to know what you're going to do today are the people in K-12. Because as you're going to hear from Rachel, the immense pressures that we're putting on our educators in K-12 right now is adding up. By the way, we have new educator effectiveness tools that are required for every single teacher in Oregon next year. That should just start off everything really well, don't you think? Okay, so, and it's important. It needs to be done. We needed a more standardized way to give feedback and to have some continuity, but that alone would be enough to start the year. But no, movement and implementation of the Common Core state standards, and by the way, if you look at them, they are not the state standard or the standards by which our education was developed. Might have been similar to my dad's. I looked at his rhetoric book from 8th grade, and he was born in 1904. So that gives you an idea. And his 8th grade rhetoric book looked more like a college rhetoric book. But at least for us, these standards are really high level. They require in-depth thinking. They require project-based learning. They require integrated research design that we've never really asked of kids. And we're not even just talking about measuring this on a multiple choice test. If you look at the prototypes that I think you'll have a chance to look at today around Smarter Balance, of which Oregon will be a part, these are different kinds of assessment items that are much more sophisticated, much more complex. So that's right out there for our K-12 brethren and sisters. We also, thanks to Rudy Crew, are really taking a serious look at the achievement gaps and discrepancies for our underserved populations. It is unacceptable for us not to look at the performance of students and look at every single category of students, because you're smart enough to know what happens when you average things out. Actually, that high school that I talked about, they always looked really good because they had IB kids. Then they had kids that were in remedial classes. If you average that all up, it kind of looks okay. In fact, it looked pretty good. But that's the same problem that we have in Oregon. So right now, Rudy Crew is systematically causing all of us to look at data at every single level. Kindergarten readiness, 3rd grade reading, 8th grade reading and math, looking at college coursework that students take while in high school, and moving further through the post-secondary continuum and looking at that from different populations. What do we know about our ELL learners? What do we know about African American students? And let's not lump Native Americans and Asian Pacific Islanders together. There are differences, and we need to split that out and look at that more carefully. So that's another way in which we are really taking this in-depth look at our work. And guess what? The business and industry folks are very interested also in the work that you're doing, because they're the ones out there kind of complaining, that's putting it mildly, saying that, the folks that we graduate, whether they be from high school or community college or 4-year institutions, that they're not able to perform in a workforce environment. And I have to admit that the workforce environment has changed dramatically. And the level of entry skills that we're expecting of people now is quite different. All the more reason that your work is so critical. So as we look at this together, we have to remember a few things, that it is not the first time that anybody has said, oh, those students, they're just not prepared. In fact, there was a 2005 survey of graduates, high school graduates, and at that time, 39% of them reported that they didn't feel, these were folks enrolled in college, and they felt like, well, we're not really prepared for the expectations of college. And the faculty, who were also part of the same survey, felt that about 42% of them were not prepared. So, okay, that's almost 8 years ago. Probably was more than 8 years ago, given that the survey was published in 2005. But now what we know is that we've got a real focus around developmental education. Now, I thought to myself, this isn't brand new. So if you really go back far enough, and I thought this was kind of interesting, Ellen Breyer reports that as far back as 1849, the University of Wisconsin established a college preparatory department for students who lacked the basic skills to be successful in the university curriculum. So in a way, that made me feel just a tad better that, you know, this has been an ongoing problem, but there's new layers to it. We also have this factor that's out there, and I think a new term that I was not familiar with, and I have to admit I've been on a steep learning curve, and I thank my colleagues such as Lisa and Elizabeth and Karen back there for really buttressing me with the data and the reports and the information that I needed to get caught up to speed on. But I was fascinated when I looked at something called the NEET rates. Are you familiar with these? The NEET rates? Okay, I could give you a whole little interactive activity where you figure out what NEET stands for, but I won't. NEET stands for not in education, employment, or training. And what they looked across the industrialized and emerging industrialized countries in the world was what percentage of your population age 15 to 24 fell into this category. They're not in school, they're not in employment, and they're not in any kind of training. And sadly, we came in 10th, and this is not the good kind of 10th. We came in 10th in terms of the percentage of our population, 15% fell into that category. Now, if you think about where did we compare, Turkey was at the top of the list with 30% of their 15 to 24-year-olds that were not in education, not in employment, and not in training. Mexico came in with 23%. On the other hand, if you kind of want to know, well, where's our goal? The Netherlands came in with 4%. Big difference there. So these are the kinds of data that our legislators at the federal level and the state level are looking at and trying to think, wow, what do we need to do about this? So as I think about the definitions that you're going to grapple with today, I, of course, look back to the CCSSO, the Council of Chief State School Officers, and the National Governors Association as one source of a definition. And there's some trends here, and I thought this one was kind of a general one, but it gives you a sense of that trend. Their definition is the knowledge and skills that students should acquire during their K-12 education to enable them to graduate from high school. Okay, that's one goal. Ready to succeed in entry-level, credit-bearing, academic college courses, and in workforce training programs. Okay? So as you begin to look across all these different definitions, one of the things that you'll see is that this constant thread about students will not need remediation. And there's some reasons for that. In the kinds of constrained economy that we have right now, the cost that we put into developmental education is seen by many as duplicative. Why isn't that work happening prior to the student arriving? And I have mixed feelings about that because I've actually known some phenomenal instructors who take that work so seriously and do such a phenomenal job that they enhance really what those students have coming into those academic classes that they didn't get in high school. And so it's not in any way a critique of the quality of the developmental education, but it's a calling out. Where does that belong, and whose responsibility is it? And can we share that responsibility across those siloed areas in ways that give feedback to the K-12 to let them know, wow, we are still seeing these behaviors or these knowledge skills lacking in the students that are entering for us. So obviously Common Core state standards are guiding a lot of this, and you have to admit this is really an interesting time in our world, in our country, because we really do now have some level playing field across which we can say there is some agreement on what we're aiming for. Not every state is signed on yet, but critical mass is there, and we have the ability to talk across those lines around what do we mean by the standards and the elements and the skills that are required in this area. But many believe that's not enough either. In fact, the Hewlett Foundation is funding work that's watching very carefully the development of the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium and PARC, because they're concerned, what if the assessments are not really measuring those deeper levels that we think are critical for performance, successful performance in the post-secondary world? And so some of those things that they think about are the ability to apply knowledge, not just master the content, but apply it, and to not only use critical thinking, but to problem solve, collaborate, communicate, and demonstrate the ability to learn how to learn. So as you work with your definitions today, I think that this will come up repeatedly as you look at other states. They certainly have begun to expand that beyond the Common Core to talk about those other important skills. And in fact, we're very fortunate because in Oregon we have probably the leading national researcher in this area right here, Dave Conley, not here today, but right in your community. And he's the person that other states are looking to help define what are those cognitive skills and what are those personal, if you will, dispositions that our students are going to need to have in addition to passing and mastering those Common Core state standards. I thought it was interesting, Lisa mentioned Massachusetts. Well, another state that I'm kind of monitoring is New Hampshire. And New Hampshire recently came out with a competency validation rubric. If you don't know that the state of New Hampshire and Maine are both moving rapidly towards embracing a proficiency-based approach to education so that we don't say to kids, well, I know you didn't master that, but you did the extra credit, and you're such a nice kid. Miranda got a lot of points for being nice, by the way. She knew how to do the blackboards and do all that stuff and help file papers, and it's probably partly why she was able to graduate. But in New Hampshire, they've broken that definition out into 3 areas: knowledge, skills, and dispositions. And I just wanted to bring to your awareness what those dispositions were. We used to call them habits of mind. Does anybody use that term in here? The habits of mind, things like self-regulation and persistence, tenacity, adaptability, and the ability to plan and manage one's work and time. Trust me, I am the instructor for those skill sets right now, every single day, as we look at calendars together. The other day I prompted her, as you could put in your phone a reminder that you need to go pick up the blue books for your final exam. Oh, she thought the phone was just for texting. So, it's just laying out those skill sets for students that did not acquire that. So as we know, even though, we don't have SBAC and PARC in place yet, we already have people ready to add additional assessments, and particularly in Oregon, around our essential skills. Do you remember the essential skills? They're still on the books, by the way. And the transition plan talks about the fact that after 2014, we need to do something with those that we haven't dealt with, those beyond the math, the writing, and the reading. And I thought it might be helpful to know what those are: to listen actively and speak clearly and coherently, to use technology to learn, live, and work, to demonstrate civic and community engagement, to demonstrate global literacy, and to demonstrate personal management and teamwork. I thought I'd leave you with 2 examples that draw upon this global literacy. And actually, before that, I want to do one other thing. I want to go back for 1 second and talk about career readiness, because, you know, a lot of what you do in this room is also helping career readiness move forward. And so I think when we look at what the folks in, for example, the Career Readiness Partner Council, which is drawing upon about 30 different organizations to come up with their definition of career readiness, there's not a lot of difference here. Listen to their set. Goal setting and planning, okay? Managing transitions, clear and effective communication skills, the critical thinking and problem solving, working productively in teams and independently, effective use of technology, and here's another one that I haven't heard us talk a whole lot about, ethical decision making. And they combine that with social responsibility. And I think that in closing, as I think about this global literacy, I'm struck with two things. I'm also attending a meeting, and I have to leave to go over and launch an initiative around ELL and our strategic plan for the state around our English language learners. And so I apologize. Lisa was so wonderful in accommodating this last-minute snafu and duplicative time frame. But yesterday, when we were meeting as a group with about 400 educators in a room focused on English language learners, we learned that over 50 schools in Oregon are embracing a dual language approach to education. And they're not just saying, okay, kids who speak Spanish need to learn English and we're going to split their time and give them half English and half Spanish and then they'll acquire English. They're also talking about full dual immersion, which allows more students who speak English to be in environments where they may learn a second language. And we know that those options exist in the private school world. I always listen to NPR and the advertisements for the schools that do this up in the Portland area. I'm sure there's some here in Eugene as well. But what people are starting to ask is, if we really take seriously global literacy, shouldn't we be trying to graduate candidates from high school, community college, and four-year institutions that are bilingual and can maneuver the world in more than one language? So I leave that with you because that's not appearing on lists very often, but it's one that I think we're going to have to pay more attention to. And I'll close with a good example of what we need to help our young people understand is the competition that they are facing. My last taxi cab driver in D.C., you know, hi, how are you doing? And I don't know, I just opened some kind of a question. I must have had too much coffee in the morning. I was taking a 7 o'clock flight. And he opened up, told me his life story in about 15 minutes. He actually missed the exit. Yep, right by National. I'm going, but you didn't want to interrupt. So we circled around. He was very kind about it. 36 years old. He was born in London. His family was originally from Ghana. His grandparents moved them to London, emphasized education, brought the kids up. They are conversant in 4 languages. He's not a kid anymore, he's 36. He earned his first degree, his Bachelor of Science in Chemistry at Georgia Tech. He's already worked in 5 different countries, not counting the U.S. He came back to the U.S. He's now enrolled in an MBA program. His wife is on a doctoral fellowship at Oxford. She is bilingual. They are paying cash for all of their education. And his siblings have the following professions. One is a pharmacist, one is an OBGYN, and the other is a commodities trader. I close with that because that's the competition out there for the students that we're preparing. And the ability for them to be adaptable and to figure out how to learn and continue that growth and development is probably one of the best gifts that we can give any student. So I wish you a very productive day. I know that Lisa is going to send me detailed notes. She'll probably have them to me by Sunday morning. And I will be looking through them and sharing that with Rudy and the others in our OEIB staff. I just want to thank you on behalf of the state for the good work that you're doing. And thank you, Lisa, for convening this great meeting. I wish you a wonderful, productive day. Thank you.
In developmental education, and I fully support that through assessment practices and strengthening things through in this continuation from high school, et cetera, that fewer people will be in developmental education. However, in the plans looking at 40-40-20, et cetera, has any thought been given to the fact that only 70% of students in high school, or out of 100 students who start, actually complete high school? And it seems to me, I don't know the full numbers, but every graduating class, there are a significant number of students in the state who don't finish high school. So there is no duplication of effort when those students choose to come to community college. And we need those students to have productive careers and to receive education. And so I don't hear about that. They will continue to need support. Thank you.
And I think one of the things that I'm so impressed with is looking at how Oregon has stepped up as leaders in
We are streaming this meeting today, so thus the microphone.
I'll just repeat, thank you for that wonderful question, because it is pointing to the other needs that are being thought about and acknowledging the amazing leadership that Oregon is taking on a number of initiatives around helping students acquire their GED, looking at the adult basic skills that can help people re-enter the education communities. I've been very impressed learning about the reverse transfer, the win-win project. These are the kinds of efforts that, first of all, say to folks, even if it didn't work for you during that first initial time, there are things we can do to help you get back on track. I think with this also, and I would suggest that you take a look at the House Bill 3333 and the particular area there under post-secondary aspirations, because within that is a recognition that we need to provide absolute levels of supports for students all the way along. So looking at programs like AVID and Aspire and Future Connect and student enrichment programs, those are going to absolutely be imperative to continue moving students forward. And I don't think that you're going to see an immediate, oh, no more developmental education courses. However, if we do not invest in our K-12 educators and help them retool for some of the new skills that they're expected to carry out on a regular basis in very diverse classroom settings, then we're going to continue to see that high school dropout rate, increase rather. And that's why Rudy is so concerned in saying to our legislators, we have to invest in those K-12 educators to help them help students be successful and graduate. So thank you for that question.